Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Klim's top-of-the-line ladies pants, the Altitude and the Artemis. I'll give you some of my thoughts on both of them, which ones I prefer, and why I actually chose to buy and wear a pair of these pants myself. Stay tuned. Now, before we get into it, I'd like to say that this video is going to focus primarily on my own opinions, why I chose one pair over the other, what I found while trying on these different pants. It's not necessarily going to explain the nitty-gritty specifications and exact features between the two. In my opinion, I think you can find many other sources online, including Klim's website, which will go into the nitty details of the specific materials that are used and so on. This is going to focus on the kind of higher level points that I think are very important in the buying decision between choosing one or the other. The stuff that isn't explained clearly on websites when they talk solely about the specifications of the two. So I'm hoping that I'm going to touch on some things that might actually help you guys make a buying decision, because if you're watching this video, you're probably looking at potentially buying either the Altitude or the Artemis pants. Now, I'll get it out of the way straight away. I ended up deciding to buy the Altitude pants. I'm actually wearing mine, as you can see right now. And some of you may be wondering in the first place, why did I even choose a ladies' pant over a men's? And that's a very good point. That decision came down to two primary reasons for me. The first major reason is that Klim actually doesn't offer men's pants in a size that fits me, primarily the waist. As you can probably tell, I'm quite tall and slim, and I have a very small waist, but slightly larger in comparison quads and bum. My waist is about 28 or 29 inches, and I think the smallest Klim men's pants have about a 32, 33, or maybe even 34 inch waist, so they were completely off the table for me. And secondly, I've never really shied away from wearing women's pants in the past, or any women's clothes, if it fit me better. I often find, especially in motorcycle gear, that lots of the women's stuff is more form-fitting, slimmer, and often fits my body shape with thinner waist, larger bum and quads a little bit better. So those are the kind of two primary reasons that I ended up choosing these Klim women's Altitude pants as my go-to motorcycle touring pants. When I was choosing between these two, I wanted a pair of pants that did a bit of everything, because that's kind of what I do and what I would use them for. I ride it on my V-strom 650 primarily, and on this bike I'll do a little bit of everything. Like I said, I'll do weekend trips, I'll do long tours, I'll do riding around for the day, short little trips, and therefore and also a little bit of off-road, but not all the time serious hardcore off-road. The fact of the matter is, where I live, to be able to get to trails that are seriously off-road, I'm driving for at least 2 to 3 hours to be able to get to them on the road. So even on a trip or a day trip, when I'm expecting to do a lot of more off-road trail riding, I'm still riding on the road at least a couple hours to get there. So I was looking for a pair of pants that, of course, were waterproof. Both of these pants have the same Gore-Tex technology, 100% waterproof. They both have very similar materials. So for me, the big primary decision was between comfort, fit, and the little bits and bobs that would make it more comfortable and better for me to wear all the time. So let's start with the pants that I chose, the Klim Altitude pants. Now, I don't think I mentioned, I'm wearing a size 8 tall. I'll explain why I chose the tall and not the regular version in a little bit, but for anyone that might be interested, I'm wearing a size 8. As I said, I have about a 28 or 29 inch waist. I stand roughly 5 foot 11 inches tall and weigh somewhere around 145, 150 pounds, just for reference. Now, Klim markets these as the more on-road touring focused pants, but in my opinion, especially after comparing and wearing the two, I honestly believe that both of these pants can be worn for primarily off-road or primarily on-road riding. They are so similar, and that's backed up by looking at the specifications and the features of both pants. They both have the same waterproofing, of course. The materials are almost identical. The sizing is almost identical. There's actually very few things that are different between these two. And in my opinion, there's no reason why you can't wear the Artemis, which are a little bit more of the off-road adventure focused pants, primarily on the road, and why you can't wear the Altitudes, the more touring and road focused pants, almost exclusively off-road. I think you should choose a pair that fits you better, that you feel more comfortable in riding, that fit you better while on the bike, and that's exactly what I did, because I do plan to do some off-road riding in these, and I think I'll have no problem at all. So let's jump into the Altitude pants. They both have the 2-button closure with a zip. Now, I noticed when wearing these versus the Artemis pants that the Altitude has a little bit of a smaller opening here. The Artemis has a much larger flap, which for me meant it actually didn't come quite as well snug around my really thin waist. So straight away at the waist, the Altitude fit me a little bit better. Next, I found that the upper material on the Altitude was a little bit softer than the Artemis. The Artemis had a little bit more of a crinkly feeling, which to me was a little bit more uncomfortable. These were a little bit softer, they don't make as much sound. The Artemis sounds a little bit more like a Gore-Tex rain jacket with that kind of crinkle. Next, I really preferred the placement of the pockets on the Altitude versus the Artemis. It's not a big deal, and to be honest, I don't use my pant pockets very often, but the pockets on the Altitude have a different angle of the zips than the Artemis. And in my opinion, they're much easier to get your hands into than the Artemis. The thigh pockets on the Artemis are angled a little bit more in line with this zip, and they actually seem to open, and the pocket actually moves a little bit away from your thigh this way and that way. And I found it really awkward to get my hand into it. I like to personally reach into my pocket with the same hand on the same side of the leg. But the way that the Artemis pockets were set up, it almost made it designed for reaching in with your opposite hand. And I found that really weird. So I like the pockets more on the Altitude, but that's a minor detail. You can also see these are the vents on the Altitude. They're also, once again, in a slightly different position than the Artemis. Also, the Altitude has many areas where there's reflective material, which the Artemis, I believe, has none of. Also a minor detail, but in my opinion, like I said, I will use these a lot on the road, and having that reflective material is a benefit in my mind. It doesn't look out of place or ugly, and I think it's just a bonus to have it. Also, and one of the most important points for me, is I found that the Altitude pants were a little bit more slim fitting, which I prefer. They're still baggy enough that I can move around, stand up on the bike fine, but they were just a little bit slimmer so they weren't as wide, which I like, and it also suits my body style a little bit better being tall and slim. And I think that comes down to the Artemis being a little bit more of the adventure-focused bike, the adventure-focused pants. They're a little bit baggier, and they're supposed to be able to allow you to move around more. In my opinion, I can still move around fine on these. I have tons of extra material. They're not too tight and constrictive, and I found that the Altitude's slightly slimmer profile fit me and felt much more comfortable. Both pants have the exact same strap system for tightening and loosening the pants around your calf, and they both have the exact same 3-button and zip mechanism here. Also on the inside, it's common in both pants, both the Artemis and the Altitude have this. There's a goat leather inlay on the inside, which is meant to help you grip the tank, especially when you're standing up riding off-road. So as I said, even though these aren't necessarily designed for as much off-road use, they still have a very important feature that tons of adventure riders absolutely that adventure riders want 100% in a pair of their pants, and that's the leather to give you that grip when you're standing up on the bike. Now, a really important consideration that I think you should take into account, and it's why I ended up going with the tall version of the Climb altitude pants, is how the pants fit you when you get on the bike. I tried on the Altitude 8 regular, and they actually fit me much better when I was standing upright off the bike. You can see that I have a little bit of extra material and a little bit of extra length when I'm wearing the 8 talls when I'm standing. But importantly, when I get on the bike, the riding position on the bike actually makes them ride up a little bit. And for me, when on the bike, these 8 tall pants fit me much better than the regular length. That's also very important if, like me, you end up wearing shorter length boots. Many people wearing these pants will have full length, either road touring or adventure boots. Me, I wear Daytona's slightly shorter boots. They're my everyday kind of boot. They're more comfortable, they're great to walk around in. I don't like to go on little day trips, especially if I'm not going off-road, wearing big full-length boots that are hard to walk around in. These are very comfortable, and it is a very important factor to consider. As I said, the 8 regular length pants fit me great when standing up, but when I get on the bike, they actually rode up far enough that they came above my short boots, which made them completely useless because in the rain, it would run down the pant and straight into my boot. With the 8 talls, they still ride up, and they still, even with all this extra length, get close to riding up above my boot, but they give me that extra length to still cover the boot, and therefore I'll prevent getting any rain down into my boots. So as you can see, even with the 8 talls, when I sit in this position, they still ride up enough that the top of my boot is only there. So they just give me that 3 inches or so of coverage, which when I was wearing the regular length pants, they were sitting about there. So that's something really important to consider, and especially if you're perhaps a bit tall and slim like me and wear smaller boots that don't come up to here, you might want to consider the tall, longer pants. And finally, that's one other really important thing to consider. When I'm wearing my pants, as I said, because I got the extra length, I have a little bit of extra material at the bottom end of the pants. That means that when I'm actually walking around, when I'm off the bike like this, the knee pads, which I've put into the highest possible slot, they give you about 3 different levels to move the knee pads up and down. It probably gives you a total ability to move the knee pad maybe 2 inches maximum, maybe even a little bit less, 1.5 inches. I have the knee pads as high up as they go, and even still, because I got the tall pants, the top of the knee pad sits right there. The top of my knee is right there. So they're not actually sitting right over my knee when I'm standing up. But importantly, when I get on the bike and I sit down and it stretches out and the seat pulls the pants up a little bit, that knee pad sits perfectly over my knee. So that's another thing to consider. Even if they fit you great standing up, it'll most likely mean that when you get on the bike, those knee pads will get pulled up a little bit too high, as well as the material getting pulled up, which might risk coming up over your boots if you're not wearing full-length boots. So for me, the reason I chose the Altitude came down to a couple things. They just felt like a better material, less crinkly and more comfortable in the upper area of the pant. The waist fit me much more snug. As soon as I put it on, I could just tell that it suited me much, much better. It's a little bit slimmer in the legs, which again, still gives me room to move around, but they fit me much better. And overall, as soon as I put them on, I could just tell that they felt a little bit better. As I mentioned, both these altitude pants and the Artemis pants have most of their features in common. They both have the same snap buckle opening with a zip. They both use the same Velcro adjustments on both sides. They both have 2 quad pockets, a venting zip on each side. Although the pockets and venting slits are in different orientations on the 2 pants. They both have a rear venting slot on both legs. They both have the goat leather on the inside of the knees. They both have the same calf adjustment strap. They both have the same button and zip system on the bottom of the legs. And they both, for the most part, use very, very similar materials, which is why I, again, think that you can use either of these pants for off-road or on-road. They are very, very, very similar, with minor changes in pocket and zip positions, a slight change in fit, and a few very minor changes in materials, which I'll show you next when I show you the Artemis pants. Okay, now I'm in the Artemis pants. As I mentioned, I'm hoping you'll be able to see in the video, but I find that this waist is a much larger opening in these Artemis compared to the altitude. Now that might be a benefit to some of you if you happen to have really wide hips and struggle to get into pants that maybe have a tight waist opening, then perhaps this could be a benefit to you. For me, with my waist that is supposed to fit this size pants, I found that they were too wide, and it actually made me use these adjustments a lot more on the Artemis pants than I had to on the altitude. So I found that this was very, very much wider on the Artemis pants. I'm not sure if you'll be able to tell or see, but this material is much more crinkly compared to the altitude, and for me, not quite as comfortable. The pockets on the Artemis are angled this way, and they actually run to the back of the pant. For me, when I like to use my same hand, it means I have to kind of turn my hand on a very weird angle to get my hands in the pocket. I thought it was a bit of a weird design. It's not the biggest deal. I actually don't use my pant pockets too often, but I just found it a little bit weird. The only way that makes sense to me is to use the opposite hand, and then I find I'm reaching a lot to get into the pant. You can also see that the angle of the venting zip is different compared to the altitude. I didn't have the chance to ride with both the altitude and the Artemis, so I couldn't compare the airflow. My instinct tells me that the altitude probably vents a little bit better, especially if you're sitting down on the bike. If I'm sitting here, these more central zips on the Artemis, I feel, are more likely to be covered from the fairings of your bike. The altitudes, which run a little bit more on the outside, being as further to the outside of your legs, I think are more likely to catch a little bit of wind. I could also be wrong. The more central location of these might catch more of the front wind if you get that wind flow, perhaps when you're standing up. So I can't confirm that, but just keep it in mind that the location of these venting zips are different on the Artemis. As you can see, I find there's quite a little bit more material in both the upper and lower leg on the Artemis, which I don't like. It's a little bit too baggy for me. The altitude, as you saw, still had enough room, plenty room for me to move around fine. These have a little bit too much. And like I said, for someone that has this waist size, I actually have relatively large quads. So if you have my waist but thin legs, this might be way too much room for you. One of the other differences between the two pants is the Artemis seem to have what they call carbonite material in the knees and seat. I don't know exactly what the carbonite material means, but I'm sure it's supposed to be something that's a little bit more durable than whatever is used in the altitude. That's maybe one of the few things that I might like my altitude pants to have. if you're ever out and about, especially as an adventure rider, on your knees in the gravel, working on the bike or something similar, having that more reinforced knee could be good. But I have no doubt that my altitude pants are still super, super durable, and I'll be doing the exact same thing in those, and I don't expect to have any problems. Now, I don't know if the Klim website actually advertises it. I don't remember it doing so when I looked, but I believe these are actually reflective points on the Artemis. I think their website only advertises some reflective points on the altitude, and it definitely looks like the altitude has more and larger reflective points, which I like, but I do believe that this and this are reflective points on the Artemis. Another thing that I didn't like with the Artemis, when I mentioned that this material up here is more crinkly and a little bit stiffer, I find when I lift my legs, because it's stiffer, it provides a little bit more of a pinch point. It's like a firmer material. It kind of doesn't bunch up and move as smoothly. It kind of makes it a little bit stiff right along here, kind of right along the zip of the vent, which might have something to do with it. It might be that zip that is not flexing. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful, and I hope it gives you some important information that lets you know whether the altitude or Artemis pants would be the better option for you. Time to go ride.